Hello, everybody. This is Editing Gavin here from the future. Just a quick side note before we get into the episode. Mike echoes a little bit during this episode, so hopefully it's not intolerable. I didn't think it was too bad, but I didn't catch it while we were recording, so here we are.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 97 of I Wish You Were Dead, a podcast about things that used to be alive. My name is Mike, and that is Gavin and Fia.
Hey.
And guys, it's spooky season.
It sure is.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Hell yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
No, I'm just going to say hell yeah.
Yeah, I'm very excited. I love Halloween, and I love fall, especially after the last few years. I haven't really had all that much of a fall. Because last year I was in, like, Central California, where it's like the leaves change, but it lasts like a week and a half. And then in South Dakota, there are very few deciduous trees, the kind that actually have leaves that change color in fall. It's mostly just pine trees. So it's less of a fall and just a slow, bleak transition to winter. But now that I'm back in the Northeast, I've been really enjoying spooky season. And this episode's very appropriate for that because we're going to be talking about bats. The little critters that fly around and get in people's attic and turn into vampires and such. But before we get into all of that, we have some housekeeping from Via.
That's right. I'm here with you guys again this week to let you know, to remind you, to rate the show on whatever platform you listen to and follow us on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube. Give us feedback about the show and any future topics you'd like to hear on the podcast. And most importantly, in my opinion, if you would like to be a guest on the show, please be sure to fill out our guest form, which can all be found in the show notes.
Thank you for that, Fia. Also, once again, I forgot while we were recording to say what we were doing next week. And next week, we're going to be talking about the next mass extinction, the End Triassic, following up from episode 89, where we talked about the End Permian mass extinction. So getting into just the start of the time of the dinosaurs. So that's going to be next week's topic. Let me know if you have any questions or comments or concerns about that topic, and on with the show. And now, Mike, what do you have for us for today in history?
All right, so October 25th in 1978, just kind of keeping with the spooky season theme here, the film Halloween, directed by John Carpenter, was first released. So yeah, nothing
interesting.
Nothing too deep there, but I figured it would kind of fit with the kind of spooky theme of the episode. So today in 1978, so that is, what is that, like 44 years ago? How does math work?
Sure. I think so.
Yeah, that's, you go back that far, you get Halloween. So, there we go, movies.
The movie, not the holiday.
Correct.
Also, unfortunately, I have it on good authority, so my brother-in-law loves these movies, all the Michael Myers,
right.
Not Mike Myers, Michael Myers. That always confuses me. But he loves these movies, and unfortunately, he said that the newest one that just came out is horrible.
I heard that from one of my students today, and I was like, "Well, good news."
Yeah, he said it was really bad.
Remade these movies 1,000 times, so you've got plenty to.
And this one is called Halloween Ends. So ideally, this will be the last one. But we'll see.
I've got a sneaking suspicion it won't be.
Hopefully for a while at least. As much as I love things like the MCU and Star Wars and like the Jurassic Park movies, I'm glad that there will not be another Jurassic Park movie for the foreseeable future.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Because especially the last two were so bad. I would rather those people work on something new instead of ruin things that I like.
So brutal.
Yeah, it was. We had a whole episode about it. We'll go take a look if you want to hear mine and Fia's thoughts about Jurassic Park or Jurassic World Dominion. It was absolutely horrible. But anyway, thanks for that, Mike. What do you have for us for Swamp Corner this week, Fia?
Yeah, so fitting in with the bat theme, I have a cute little critter called Raffinsky's big-eared bat, or scientifically Corinnorhinus raffinskii. The genus means club nose, but like the common name, they also have huge ears. They're found in Louisiana as well as other parts of the southeastern area of the U.S. They use echolocation to find food, and they eat a wide range of insects, and moths make up about 90% of their diet. Now, the reason why I found this guy was I Googled swamp bat because, swamp corner, swamp bat.
Sure, yeah.
I could not find said swamp bat, but I did find that this particular bat will live in tree roots or parts of trees that have been like dug out, and then there's like holes inside of them. And some scientists went on this research expedition and took a ton of pictures of these ones in cypress trees that are found all over Louisiana.
Nice. Yeah, bats eating insects and echolocating is a very common theme, as we'll see. Bats.
Take it away.
Getting into our main topic here. Bats are kind of crazy in pretty much everything they do. They are the second most diverse group of mammals. So they have about 1,400 species, which is about 20% of all mammals. The only group more diverse than them is rodents, because, of course, rodents are crazy, which make up about 40% of all mammals. So between just these two, that's over half of all mammals are either rodents or bats.
That's stupid.
Yeah, it sure is. And not only that, bats, it's not like, certain groups of mammals where they're only kind of found in a couple of places. Like, for example, elephants today are only found on the continent of Africa and in various places in Southeast Asia. Bats are literally everywhere. There is, from what I could find, one single country where there are no bats, and that's Greenland. That's it.
I guess if you have a fear of bats, then move there.
Absolutely. You might have some other things to contend with, but yes, if you are deathly afraid of bats, Greenland is the place to be. But even Antarctica has a couple of islands that have bats on them. Not many, but there are some there. But even the most remote islands, most out in the middle of nowhere islands like Hawaii, New Zealand, all of them, even the Aleutian Islands, which are that little island chain that connects Alaska over to Russia, even most of them have bats, which is crazy because those are not only really isolated, but also really far north and really, really cold. So the fact that they have bats are crazy.
So, I mean, the obvious question is, why not Greenland?
I don't know. That's a wonderful question. I don't actually know. I would assume that there aren't enough bugs. That would be my first thought.
Is that a perfect transition into what bats tend to eat?
Yeah, so we're going to go over some of the features of bats. But one quick thing, circling back to a little bit of where they're found. New Zealand is extremely famous for having no native mammals except for bats. So
Really?
natively, not even rodents natively live there. Those came with the first human settlers, likely coming from mainland Australia. And yeah, it is just absolutely insane. And we'll circle back to those New Zealand bats in a little bit. But
cool.
The bats are able to get to all these places because of their most defining and unique feature among mammals, which is that they can fly.
I thought it was going to be the blood sucking, but okay. Your thing was cool too.
We'll get to that. Because of course we will. It's spooky season. But yeah, bats are only one of 4 groups of animals ever, not including humans because humans don't fly themselves, that have ever evolved how to fly. So in the chronological order, it was insects by a long shot. Insects were flying for hundreds of millions of years before anything else. Then pterosaurs, then birds, then bats. There are lots of gliding mammals, flying squirrels, etc., that glide very well, but none of them actually fly, which is what bats do. They have true powered flight, just like a bird, just like an insect. But
Wow.
they're very weird compared to all the other flyers. So
How?
the two that I'm sort of going to compare them to, because insects are doing their own thing, but to pterosaurs and birds. Birds being probably the one that most people are most familiar with. But so bird wings are mostly made out of their feathers. The actual skin and bones part of the wing doesn't make up all that much of like the wing surface. So if you picture if you look at your own hand, they have basically a very reduced but still their thumb that just moves like a single feather, and then they have their pointer and middle finger that are fused together that they can move sort of back and forth but not really up or down much at the wrist. And it's not like those bones are elongated or anything. The wing shape is just made up of all the feathers, so they don't need the bones to be elongated to provide that sort of wing surface area. And the reason that they do that is because feathers are crazy, unique. We talked quite a bit about feathers way back in, I think, episode 21 about flight, just in general.
Was that how, did we talk about how flight evolved like a couple distinct times in history, or am I misremembering that?
No, yep, that's right.
Okay.
Yep, that was way long ago. But we definitely have an episode talking about that. And we'll reference that a little bit later. But that's sort of how bird wings are shaped. Is that they have the same forearm bone that you do. They have the same upper arm bone that you do, but it's the hand and wrist that get weird with birds. Pterosaurs are similar to bats in that their wing is made out of mostly skin, but pterosaurs, they got rid of their pinky and then just made their ring finger really super long. Like as long or longer than the entire rest of their arm. And then they kept the thumb, pointer, and middle finger free to be able to walk around on, because they would walk on all fours. And then they just stretched a big flap of skin between the end of that super long ring finger to usually their foot. And that's what made up their wing surface area. Bats, instead, use their whole hand. So if you just took your fingers and stretched all of them out except the thumb, and then stretched a big web between them, and then lastly one from the end of your pinky down to your foot, that would be a bat wing. They keep the thumb free to be able to cling to stuff and or walk around. Some of them are actually pretty good at walking around on the ground, surprisingly. But mostly to cling to like the walls of caves or trees and things. And bats not only sort of are okay at flying, so when you think of like a flying animal, you probably think of a bird just because, like I said, that's the most familiar.
Mm-hmm.
But bats are extremely capable flyers. They are typically considered much more maneuverable than birds, generally. Just due to having more joints in the wing to be able to adjust it in very small ways. But, when you're flying, adjusting it in small ways can mean you can turn on a dime versus having to take like a big loop to turn around or something, which also helps going after all of their little fluttery insect prey that they eat. Most bats eat insects, but we'll talk about that a little bit later. And they are also extremely efficient flyers. I read a whole paper about like the physics about how much energy they use compared to things like birds, and they are extremely efficient because looking at them, looking at a bird, it can sort of glide. It sort of folds its wings in a little bit, and it can glide using basically no energy. Bats can't really do that, but they just have such an efficient flap that they don't really need to. So they just constantly flap the entire time, and it looks like it'd be really tiring, but they're just really good at it.
Huh.
Yeah. And something that I learned doing the research for this, there are even a couple species of bats that hover just like hummingbirds.
Whoa.
Because they also eat nectar like hummingbirds. And they do this by creating tiny little vortexes underneath them that create lift and stability for them to be able to sit in the same spot while they're drinking nectar from a flower.
So now we're talking about physics at this point.
Oh, yeah. And I'm not going to go
That's-
deep into physics. I did not do awesome at physics. But yeah, to say that, you know, bats are sort of a second class citizen of the air is just absolutely not true. So the second thing that I think of when I think of bats other than flying is not blood sucking, but as Fia mentioned, their echolocation. Bats invented sonar way before people did, and that's how most of them find their food. They fly around at night, and because most of them are nocturnal, especially the insect-eating ones, they don't really see because it's dark. So they emit very high-frequency sounds that get reflected back, and then based on that, they can sort of pinpoint where the target is. And like I said, most bats can do it. Some of them can't. But we'll talk about sort of their distinctions in a little bit. And what's really interesting is that some insects have evolved ways of countering the sonar.
Whoa.
Yeah.
That's
Some of
wild.
them are really fluffy. So instead of reflecting it back, it just sort of absorbs the sound. So it's like stealth mode. Some of them can sort of sense, you know, they can quote unquote hear it. They don't have like a hearing system like vertebrates do, but they can feel it. And then they just start flying all crazily. So they try to avoid being caught that way. And then others can emit their own sound that like interferes with the bat sound.
That's incredible.
So instead of, yeah, it's crazy. Yeah. And that's why we haven't really done too many episodes about insects, is because they, like plants, they kind of scare me.
I mean, I do have a question about this though when it comes to the echolocation.
Yeah.
It was always my understanding, like, do whales have something similar?
Yeah, absolutely.
How common is this in nature? Is this a rare thing, but there's a couple notable examples, or is this way more common than I had originally thought?
Generally, no. It is pretty uncommon. And I will say it's usually not the big whales that do it. It's a lot of the smaller whales.
Mm-hmm.
And they actually have very strange adaptations because just the mechanics of water are similar but different to the mechanics of moving sound through air. But yeah, generally it is a fairly uncommon thing, and we haven't really even seen it in too many groups that we can tell, you know, obviously in like the fossil record. Because whales have very specialized structures that let them do this. And then as we'll talk about, bats have a couple very special structures that let them do this too. So unless there's some fossil group that is very strange and does it in a really weird way that we can't tell, we haven't really found anything that echolocates like whales or bats do.
Wow.
Yeah. So, like I said, those are the two things that I think of first and foremost when I think of bats, but just some other general weird things about bats, because they are truly, truly bizarre mammals. Their default, like, resting foot position is closed. So if you just sort of let your hand dangle by your side, your fingers are like slightly curved, and you don't have to put any like effort into having them curved instead of straight. For bats, for their back feet, the default is a firm grasp, and it's
Firmly
they
grasp
have these tendons. Exactly. They have these tendons sort of that way, so they can sleep resting upside down in trees and stuff. Yeah, they have the same nerve setup that makes like our fingertips so sensitive, covers their entire wing, and they have lots of little tiny like feeler hairs all over the wing, and they do this to be able to sense air current so they can adjust their wing in all those different ways that we mentioned earlier. So the sensitiveness of your fingertips is their entire like 80% of their body. Because bats eat so many insects, specifically mosquitoes, I saw it cited several places. that malaria deaths in the world would be enormous if it weren't for bats.
Wow.
Along
For
with
bats.
lots of other mosquito and insect-borne diseases.
That makes sense, but wow.
Yeah. I even saw some, and this is purely, speculative, so don't take this with a major grain of salt. But I saw some things being like, could humans have even like really got going, or would malaria have just completely decimated human populations if not for bats eating all the mosquitoes back when like humans were evolving?
That's a thought. That's, yeah.
Yeah. Bats also themselves have very extreme immune systems. They tend to carry lots of diseases. They live in really large, very close together groups, so it's not a surprise that they can spread diseases from one to another very quickly. But their immune systems are really resistant to the types of diseases that they typically have, which lets them mutate in things and then get transferred to other species. So things like rabies, bats tend to be, reservoirs of rabies, potentially Ebola. We haven't super figured out where Ebola actually comes from, but it's potentially bats. And notably, given the last couple of years, coronaviruses, such as SARS specifically, that cropped up in the early 2000s, came from bats. And then I will say this very briefly about COVID-19. It may or may not have come from bats. The jury is still out on that, whether it was bats or pangolins or some other potentially scientific means. I don't actually know. From what I've seen, the evidence still suggests bats, but who's to say? And we're not going to talk much more about that. Moving on. Some bats are herbivorous. So not all of them eat insects. Some eat fruit bats, or some bats eat nectar, like I mentioned with the hummingbird bats before. A lot of the ones that are herbivorous are major pollinators in their environments, just like a lot of insects are, things like bees. So in their environments, they serve a partial niche as the same partial niche as bees, which is weird.
Yeah.
And lastly, talking about some of their food, there are only 3 species that are known to drink blood.
Out of?
Like I said, about 1,400.
Okay.
So, 2 of them, all 3 of them are like Central and Northern South America. 2 of them are weirdly bird specialists. They will drink blood from other stuff, but they mainly go after birds. We don't really know how, but they've been captured because they have like the tooth morphology to be eating blood. But when they're captured and, their stomach contents, tested and it's bird blood, we don't know how they do it because most bats eat while flying.
Yeah.
So... very strange. The last one is the one that most people probably think of, which is called the common vampire bat. And this is the kind that, will crawl around on the ground and sort of nip at the hooves and things of like livestock is mainly what they go after. But they'll just land on the ground, and they're surprisingly really good at moving around on the ground for being so oddly shaped. And they will just sort of nip. Their front teeth are very forward facing and very pointy, so they'll just sort of make a little paper cut around the hooves of like a big cow or something. And then their saliva has like an anticoagulant in it, so they'll just sit and lick up the blood. So they don't actually suck the blood. They just lick it as it flows. Yep.
That's gross.
It's fancy is what it is.
Yeah.
It's like a live popsicle.
Yeah. I love that. And also hate that. But
anyway,
yeah, eating only blood is very strange, especially for one, like a type of animal that feeds on, I guess, parasitizes, because it's a parasite. Things that are reasonably closely related to itself, because blood is how all your diseases move around your body. So eating blood is potentially really dangerous. So it's probably the extreme immune systems that bats have probably plays a part in that. But
I was going to say, does this mean that bats have like do they suffer from a lot of these problems that we would expect if other animals drink blood, or are they kind of uniquely well adapted to be able to handle it? These few species that do drink blood.
Yeah, these are some of the few that this is like all that they do. There are other species like things like birds. There's a handful of species of birds that will, like if you've ever heard of an oxpecker, they're like the birds that will like sit on the backs of like rhinos and stuff, and they're not actually eating bugs off the rhino, which is what most people kind of think. No, they will tear little holes in the rhino and lick up its blood.
Oh boy.
Oh my god.
Yeah,
that seems dangerous.
So, oh yeah, but what's the rhino gonna do? It can't reach up on its back. So, that's not all that these birds do. They'll also eat insects and things like that and go hunt for themselves. But these bats are, from what I could find, the only vertebrates. I'll say the only non-fish vertebrates, because fish are weird, and it would not at all surprise me if there was a fish that was a purely. Actually, I know several fish. There's like lampreys and things that only eat blood, but only land vertebrate that can get away with eating nothing but blood.
That's crazy.
Yeah. So those are some of the just features and fun facts about bats. So let's talk about bat diversity, which is a little strange. Bats are in the group Chiroptera. That is sort of the scientific name for bats, which loosely means hand wing, which makes sense. And traditionally, they're sort of split into two main groups. The Megachiroptera, the big bats, and the Microchiroptera, the little bats. So, that's how it always has been. The little bats are the ones that fly around at night, eat insects and such, and also include things like vampire bats. And the big bats are things like your fruit bats, flying foxes, etc., that are mostly diurnal and herbivorous. However, as always, evolution is more complicated than that. And as it turns out, some of the small bats are more closely related to the big bats than they are to the other small bats. So,
and that's based on
genetics mostly.
Okay, just checking.
Because as we'll talk about, we do not have many bat fossils.
I see.
All right.
So instead, and I'm not going to go too much into detail on all this, but because of some complex reason, I'm sure that there is a reason, I don't know what it is, but why they couldn't just pick, because I think there's 5 families of quote-unquote little bats that are more close to the big bats than the other little bats. I don't know why they couldn't just take those 5 families and put them under Megachiroptera anyway. I'm sure that there is a reason, but I don't know what it is. So instead, they had to toss out those group names and come up with new ones. Sure. So the big bats and those couple groups of small bats are in the group Yinterochiroptera, and the other little bats are Yangochiroptera. Sure.
I like that.
Yeah, and like I said, I didn't read the paper that suggested all of that. I'm sure there is a reason why they had to come up with new names. Some like vague, arcane rules of how we name things. I'm sure that exists. I have no idea what it is. Moving on. I could go into all the various little subgroups of bats, but those are sort of the big ones, and we're trying to keep it light here for spooky season. And so, bats moving on to talk about some of their relatives. Because if you had to guess, you'd probably be wrong about what bats are most closely related to.
Yeah, I do wonder about this.
I mean, do most people say birds? Because that wouldn't be my guess, but I assume that's what a lot of people's guess would be.
No.
So
Although
I've
Yeah, go
heard
ahead.
them like as like sky rats, but like then that's also like seagulls and stuff.
Yeah,
But like
Right.
something along the
Rats
lines
with
of like
wings.
rodents. Yeah, yeah.
Right. And you would absolutely not be alone in that. Because when you have an animal that is just very strange looking compared to what its relatives could be, you tend to have a hard time figuring out what you're related to. It's the same reason why we don't really know where turtles fit on the reptile tree, because turtles are very strange compared to other reptiles. So superficially, they generally kind of look like mice or rats or other rodents. And I feel like that's what most people would say. And even the famous father of giving things, scientific names, Carolus Linnaeus, originally put them in the order primates, along with monkeys and apes and humans. However, they really aren't particularly closely related to either primates or rodents.
Yeah.
So, zooming out a little bit here, placental mammals, so that would be mammals that are not marsupials or platypus or echidna. So most mammals are split into 4 large groups. There's one that is sloths, armadillos, and anteaters. Another that is elephants, manatees, and hyraxes. If you don't know what a hyrax is, don't worry about it. One that is primates, rodents, and rabbits. And then the last one is pretty much everything else. Shrews, cats, dogs, bears, ungulates, so things with hooves, pangolins, and bats. And a little content warning here for one of our particular hosts. There are some scientific words incoming that are adult words.
Okay.
Mike, you've been warned.
I thought this was towards me because you said scientific names.
Oh no!
Oh no!
I know where this is going. Should I mute myself, or am I allowed to laugh?
You
Those
can
are your
laugh.
two options. All right.
If it gets super obnoxious, I'll just fix it in post. It's fine.
All right.
So
let's do it.
That last group, that is shrews and moles, carnivorans, so your cats, dogs, bears, hyenas, etc. Ungulates, the hooved animals, and also whales. Pangolins, which if you don't know what a pangolin is, not a penguin, a pangolin, look it up. They're very cute. And also bats. That group is called Laurasiatheria. Within that group, the moles, shrews, and hedgehogs off on their own doing their own thing. The remaining groups, which again, bats, pangolins, carnivorans, and ungulates, share a particular feature of external testes. At least ancestrally. Pangolins no longer have that. They are inside the body. And so these groups together are united under the group Scrotifera, named after the scrotum that they all share.
They all share a scrotum.
They sure do. Why that was the defining feature they decided to name this major group of mammals after?
Are cool. That's why.
Maybe. But that is the group that they are all in. Weirdly, also, as you may or may not know, if you are on this 50% of the population, primates also have that, but differently. And I'll just leave it at that.
Well, now I have more questions. But
Okay.
all right.
Yeah, primates and some rodents also have that, but it was evolved separately. Most mammals and vertebrates in general have internal testes. So
Losers.
yeah.
Oh,
But this group is extraordinarily varied because think of all the things that this includes. It includes bats, whales, cows, dogs, cats, rhinos, deer. All of these extremely different body shapes are within this subgroup.
Yeah.
And within this group, bats have sort of been bounced around as to who they're closest related to because they are so strange. And this has kind of varied over the years, including one study that placed them as a sister group to perissodactyls, which are your horses, rhinos, and tapirs. So this particular person suggested that they're more closely related to horses, rhinos, and tapirs than horses, rhinos, and tapirs are to things like deer and cows and hippos, which I would
That's
not
bold.
believe, and most scientists, I think, tended to agree. Generally, they're sort of now seen as sort of the first group to branch off on their own, so they're not super closely related to anything else that we have today. And that kind of transitions us into their evolution and their fossil record. So, as you can imagine, for a small thing that is very fragile, we do not have good bat fossils. Bats have previously been described to me as, quote, toothpicks wrapped in tissue paper, unquote. So, they do not leave good fossils at all, for a number of reasons. First is that they're small. Small things tend to have small bones, which are more fragile. Big things with big, sturdier bones are much more likely to become fossils. They're also the structure of the bones. You know, you can still have fairly small bones, but have them be robust. Things like moles. Moles actually leave pretty good fossils because they bury themselves. They live underground, which is convenient. But their bones are also really dense because they put a lot of strain on them while they're digging. Whereas bats still put a lot of strain on their bones, but it's sort of the structurally a different kind of strain. So just the structure of bat bones tends to not lend itself to being fossilized. They also don't live in places that are good for it. Forests are really bad for making fossils because there's generally no sand or sediment being deposited, which is what you need to become a fossil. You need to be buried. And also their behavior. Bats, because they fly, that's part of their behavior. And that just means that in general, they don't, congregate in one place a lot of the time to all be swept up in like a big flood or something like that to leave behind, a nice group of fossils. And so a common point that can sometimes be made by people who don't accept evolution is that there are no transitional fossils. If you say, look at these fossils, there's a clear transition here. They'll be like, well, what about between these two other fossils? And so about 95% of the time, that is a bad faith argument. Bats are firmly in that 5% where we have absolutely no transitional fossils of bats. Like nothing really even close.
Wow.
Yeah. So the first bats that we find are from the Eocene epoch, about 50 million years ago, and they are already fully recognizable as bats. They have a few differences. For example, bats today, with a couple of exceptions, only have a claw on the thumb that's, free to cling to stuff. Some of them have a claw on their pointer finger, but none of them have a claw on the middle ring or pinky finger. These bats that we find around this time do. They have claws on all the fingers. And also, their ear bones are different in a way that suggests that they couldn't echolocate yet, that hadn't evolved yet. And so all of these fossils are mostly found in lakes. So it just happened that a bat died while flying or something and fell into a lake. Lakes are really good at preserving fossils because all the, rivers and stuff that, flow into like a lake dump sediment too. So one of the few places where we get good bat fossils are from lakes. And because the earliest bats we have are about 50 million years ago. There's a roughly 10 to 20 million year gap between when bats likely split off from the rest of their scrotum supporting brethren that we just have nothing.
Yeah, that's really tough.
Yeah. And particularly, I read when I was looking up more stuff about the Scrotifera, because why wouldn't I? That group supposedly evolved around 70 to 80 million years ago. And so because bats seem to be the first group to split off, there's potentially 30 million years of time where we just have no information about how bats got to be the way we know them.
So there's really not much research on like the paleontology of bats then?
Right.
Okay.
And that's tough. So one of the things that they kind of pounded into our heads early in grad school is that with vertebrate paleontology, sometimes you're going to have a sample size of 1, which for anyone who's not, versed in statistics, a sample size of 1 is really bad. But sometimes with paleontology, that's all you got. There might only be 1 of these fossils in the world that's ever been found. And so sometimes that's just the case. However, because of that, paleontologists generally are quite good at trying to fill in gaps with limited information. You have to be careful to not, make too many assumptions. But in general, paleontologists tend to be pretty good at that kind of thing. And so in episode 21, where we talked about the evolution of flight in general across, several different groups of animals, we mostly focused on birds because we actually have the non-flying bird to flying bird transition pretty well preserved. We have that pretty well documented. And the general consensus is that birds started out as on the ground running animals that already had feathers to keep themselves warm or to show off to mates or something, and then co-opted them for use in jumping, which then led to flight, which is not sort of the intuitive way that you would think of, evolving to fly. So the most intuitive way is to think of something starting off gliding and then just being like, well, I'm already in the air, I might as well do some flapping and get a couple extra feet on this, and then that evolving to flight. However, that, even though it sounds so obvious that the ground up, hypothesis sounds kind of silly, we have almost no evidence of that really ever happening. For example, we have a ton of gliding, flying squirrels, all sorts of gliding mammals and things today. And none of them seem to be even on their way to evolving to fly because they don't need to.
Yeah.
If they do well enough in their environment, then why would they? However, that's kind of speculated as to what happened with bats. Is that they started off gliding in their, foresty habitats, and some selective pressure pushed them to start flying instead of just gliding. We don't know what that is, but that's kind of, the general thought. So sadly, that's pretty much it for bat evolution and fossil record.
Wow.
Yeah. But lastly, as with most groups that we talk about that are still alive today, we're going to end on a depressing note talking about their conservation. Yeah. Bats in general are not doing great, especially here in North America. Here in the US, particularly the northeastern United States, bats are really struggling with a fungal disease called white nose syndrome.
Oh, I read about this.
And it was actually found at first in a cave in New York State, in central New York, somewhere around the Finger Lakes region. In 2006, that was the first time it was discovered anywhere. And what it does is that it basically makes them wake up early from their hibernation. Most bats that live in places that have winter will hibernate in caves or like under the eaves of a house or something, or in bat boxes that people will make. And this fungus makes them wake up early, and that kills them because either it's too cold, or even if it's warm enough for them to survive, there's no food for them because the insects haven't spawned yet, so there's just no food for them and they die.
Oh.
Mhm.
And
Ooh.
this affects more or less every bat species. We haven't really seen a bat species that is like immune to it yet or anything.
I vaguely recall seeing that this big-eared bat, Rufinski's, was not really affected by that, but don't take my word on it.
Interesting. I hope that's true.
Yeah.
But yeah, most bat species, again, particularly in the northeast of North America, are really struggling with this. From what I've seen, there is generally a 90% minimum mortality rate for caves that get infected by it. So that's pretty bad. In 2014, it was discovered that the disease has crossed the Mississippi River, which is sort of the Great Divide of
Mississippi.
Yep, of North America. And as of May 2021, it was found in South Dakota, because that was when I was finishing up my master's, and my parents came to help me move all my junk back to New York. And we went to Wind Cave National Park in the Black Hills of South Dakota, and they told us about the bats in the cave have been documented to have it. So they made us like step on, as we were leaving the cave, they have this like cleansing sponge thing that they made you walk on and sort of splash around on your boots or your shoes so that it did not leave the cave as best they could. So yeah, even as far west as South Dakota, the bat populations in North America are really struggling with this.
And that's probably going to have some intense ecological effects.
Absolutely. So, surprisingly, white nose syndrome was not our fault to begin with. Right, so, but humans have absolutely helped it spread from cave to cave by going into caves and then not washing their hiking boots and things like that afterward. So, if you go spelunking in your nearby caves, sanitize your clothes and especially your boots, because it spreads through bat poop from bat to bat.
No.
Yeah, so yeah, wipe your boots, please. But otherwise, bats are generally protected in just about pretty much every country. Bats are just sort of have a blanket, you cannot kill them, that is against the law. So when you find a bat in your attic, don't just do the cliche and hit it with a tennis racket. That's bad and likely illegal. That being said, it is culturally important for food in some regions of the world. People still kill them to make food. That is neither here nor there. I'm not going to comment on other regions' cultural practices. But also, just in addition to all that, general habitat destruction, as with pretty much every group of animals on the planet, not doing great because we take away all their forests and things. Especially also on islands. Anywhere humans go, we bring things like cats and rats and things with us that kill all the native things, especially with bats. Particularly, going back to that, those couple of New Zealand species that were the only mammals there, but now humans have brought all of our travel companions with us, rats and cats and things. There's a particular species of bat that is also really good on the ground, and it is a terrestrial insect predator. So it crawls around on the ground. It can still fly, but it spends most of its time on the ground, and that poor guy is just doing horribly because of all the cats and rats and things that humans have brought there. And lastly, their food is also doing really poorly. Insects are doing really, really poorly in the world right now. Population numbers drop about 5% of biomass per year, based on some measurements. So in the last like 20 years or so, it's gone down about 75%.
That's alarming.
Yeah. Considering we need, even though bugs are annoying, we need them to do all sorts of things for us. So, bats are kind of the bat in the coal mine, I guess. That was a horrible pun, but I stand by it.
As you should.
So that is what I want to leave you with, is that bats are not these scary things, although they do occasionally spread disease. Respect them from a distance and maybe put up a bat box in your yard or something for them to live in.
To be fair, humans spread diseases too, so.
Yes, we sure do.
And most of them will not eat your blood, so you don't have to worry about it.
No, unless you live in
South America?
Southern Central America or Northern South America, you are very safe. And mostly if you're a bird, you might have some trouble. But unless you're like a cow, then no, you're probably fine.
Well, that's great news for everybody involved. Is there anything else we need to discuss?
I don't know. Do you guys have any last burning questions about bats?
What are we going to be talking about next week?
Why do I always forget this? Future
I got
Gavin,
you.
come up with something because I don't actually know.
Oh.
It's gonna be a nice
We're leaving this in. We're leaving in the flaws this week.
Have a nice
No
sound
cuts.
effect and-
No cuts.
One take wonders over here. Well,
Absolutely.
While Gavin tries to figure out what we do next week, we want to thank everybody for listening on to episode 97 of I Wish You Were Dead, a podcast about things that used to be alive. My name is Mike. That was Gavin and Fia, and we'll see all of you guys next Wednesday. Take care, everyone.
This episode of I Wish You Were Dead was written by Gavin Davidson and hosted by Gavin Davidson, Mike Bryson, and Finella Campanino. It was sound edited and edited for YouTube by Gavin Davidson. Special thanks to former guests of the pod and to listeners like you.